Too exciting in the random events phase. Along with my kind of how do I cope with this game and deal with it, one of the things is I largely am ignoring the secret event chits. I hate chit pull systems though, and it's this annoying... I mean, it's okay when you're pulling one chit to see what something does and then you go do it or whatever, but here I'm pulling 10 chits, one for each country. Granted, that's a solo event here, but still you'd be passing the cup around. It's this obnoxious mechanical aspect of the game that I just really don't like. And then on top of that, whether or not they're in English, I have to look up so many of them if I want to pay attention. So it's kind of like, fuck it, I don't care enough about it. And that's part of why I want to walk away from the game. Of course, in order to do so, well, I don't know the rules to the next game I wanted to play. I'm slated to do something. I've got to stop taking things as review copies, which some companies are making easier on me. Yeah, apparently not everyone sees any value in the coverage that I do in terms of getting their games more exposure, which I can't really blame them. I got enough to do anyway. But yeah, unfortunately there's one that sought me out that I agreed to do, and I feel stuck in this in part because I'm having trouble coping with reading rules right now, or anything else in life, to tell you the truth. I don't know what the hell to do. Okay. So anyway, and another note that doesn't really have a lot to do with the story of the game, but like I said, I'm at the end of the last video, I'm using the Averio software to try to load things up. Man, the interface to that is just such shit. I've got to open and close the entire software again and again if I push a button wrong or something. It's just, it's so much easier to just pull the files directly off the camera, dump them where I want them, dump them into Movie Maker, but I'm hoping that I'll get some kind of performance advantage on my machine where I won't lose 20 minutes of my life using my computer. Test this out. It's actually, I've been kind of pulling myself away from the video game I've been playing, but to tell you the truth, to test this out, I need to actually be running the video game at the time while the movie is finally finishing in all of its stages, basically. So, whatever. I'm not absolutely certain of the legitimacy. Austria and Spain have declared a peace with Russia. If Austria alone could declare she's breaking her alliance with Poland and negotiate a separate peace. And that's the model I'm following here. Whether or not, because Spain has to sort of follow Austria because of the special thing. Question is whether Spain should have to pay any political cost for that. The way the rules are written, actually they couldn't do this as an alliance. Austria and Spain as an alliance, as part of the alliance, could have been 2 votes out of the 3 in the Polish alliance to say, hey, let's have a white peace and offer that to the Russians, which is exactly what happened between the two. In fact, I think Spain should not be charged. I don't know. They shouldn't be charged for the war either. So I just don't know. I'll leave it as it is. Anyway, if there was that kind of tripartite agreement to offer a white peace, and I'm sure Poland would have accepted it, then Russia would have the option of either accepting this 3-player alliance agreement, 3 players offering a white peace, or they could just refuse it. But because of the special circumstances surrounding Spain, it doesn't quite work. Anyway, that's where we are. I'm not doing anything else in the diplomacy phase. Targeting minors that people barely have a chance to get, it just seems so pointless, and I'm too tired to do pointless things, so we go to the economics. The economies of the nations that have big debts are really straining, like France with this pestilence. They had to drop some of their That was actually last turn it came about. I don't know how they ended up surviving. I probably miscounted. But they had to drop some of their units. Austria had to increase its debt, actually, and that's a nightmare situation. It had no option in this case. It actually could not meet its core obligation of paying off of its debt because of all the unrest that it has throughout its land. They really want to avoid wars from now on. They learned their lesson. Don't enter into a war when you're already on shaky ground. Now, see, that's a problem that you might not be in control of. For example, someone might decide they have some aims on France, and they may want to pick off the cripple. France can become very powerful. You could get decent points on beating up on a weak nation. So I could see that really skewing the game towards someone trying to gather points at this point. In particular, a country like Prussia, as we said, has interests in Poland. They want to recover their own war effort, though. They have a couple of their own little issues going on down there. So most of Europe is struggling. Something like Sweden is just hosed. They can't get anywhere. Basically, they have this army, whatever it is, and they can't grow it. And it's not big enough that they can really intervene anywhere on their own. That's fitting, actually. Sweden probably is a little too potent early in the game, although we never saw them really operating on their own, so maybe they can't. That's the real problem with the Great Northern War, is here they're facing Poland and Russia, and man, they, even at the height of their power, they probably don't have the kind of force pool and the economy to sustain that kind of war. Maybe with a lot of economic aid they would, but we're not going to see that. There doesn't seem to be, if there is any alliance that's to be formed, it's probably Holland saying, look, I can help out you weaker people. Maybe you can gain some ground on fighting against my enemies. I seem to have these perennial enemies of Prussia and England now, and Spain would have joined in too. If I could get an ally in that, or a couple allies, maybe something cool would happen. But there's no one with the navy to challenge the English in particular, and well, if Spain's involved in it, they're not an issue. So many times I bring up the issue of, what do you do if you're not winning a game? And that definitely comes to the forefront here, even at this very early point. It strikes me that people like France just don't have a real chance. So now their goal is what? Is their goal to pad their position and try to not come in last? Or is their goal maybe to try to end the game early? It's just a matter of what should people deserve, or should they try to take their revenge out on someone who pissed them off? Well, no one really pissed them off. Spain beat them fair and square. It was their own wars that they started, and they got their ass handed to them. So they're probably going to play reasonably and try to gain some position somehow. And maybe the best way of doing that is just try to rebuild the nation up to the point where it can win some wars. Or if it gets a nice opportunity to enter into a war that it thinks it can win, maybe it can become Holland's buddy. Who knows? Just to be an update on the Averio side of things, it's definitely significantly less memory intensive than Windows Movie Maker. I just wish I could figure out a way to use it to construct the movies without their full interface. I just want to yank videos down from my camera, dump them into a file, and then run something that I can just throw the movies in and name it myself and everything. All the interface, it gives me this stupid calendar, and I don't seem to have control over naming my movies, or I have some over where they go, I think, but I don't have too much control over where it places them, which is okay. I can get used to that, but it's just annoying. Rounds of combat definitely makes a significant difference, the enforce there. So the poles were broken here on the first round. They take a hit. Well, they would have routed in that case, but actually the biggie here was that they were facing a more powerful force by that point. And so Peter managed to wipe out. He actually wiped out two different forces there. These guys escaped from back here. Now, most of the Polish territory has fallen, or most of the Polish captured territory in Russia has fallen. So here's the problem. Russia, to some extent, may want to just take everything that they can from Poland. They may not want to slow down. Now, I don't know how many claims they have in Poland, but I think it's quite significant for probably no good reason. To indicate the later, divisions of Poland. Let's see, Wielka Moskwa. I don't know where that is. I think this is Russian territory. That's their hereditary. Minsk Berezina. That's Minsk. I think this is Brinsk. I don't know what the hell. This is Berezina there. They've already got that. So if they can hold Minsk, they can get that. All the Baltic states... Oh, no, sorry. These are disputed. All the Baltic states can be converted. I think they've captured this by now. I'm not sure. But that may be a principality, in which case... So goddamn much you have to look up in this game. Just constantly trying to see, hey, did they capture this yet? And no aids to help you. I should be using little counters to indicate how long somebody's been sitting somewhere. Well, we'll see. So indeed, the territory is Russian. It is able to be absorbed. It is a principality. And we see the Russians cleaning up Tver and grabbing what else they can. Now, here's the problem. If I interpret this that Poland can't just surrender, and we're done with the fall combat, essentially. If I interpret it as Poland can't just surrender and enforce that on Russia, the way that I've been saying, hey, I don't like how that works. Well, my worry is Russia can grab most of Poland by refusing the surrender. They can get, half the territories. Now, they can't really, because they don't have claim to half. And they're not going to want to spend continuous amounts of resources. But, I'm beginning to think the rules as written may actually work better, wherein someone can get out of a war. I don't know. I am just frozen by this, not sure which way I want to be able to go. Anyway, that'll probably be a decision for tomorrow. I'll finish up this year. In terms of getting the life phase, which is another pain in the ass, looking through the list of all the people who are going to die. You only have to check. Well, EU's got the same problem, but somehow because there's less military units on the board and such it's usually pretty easy to find them. And then when you actually need them, when you're actually starting a war, you look and you can see very clearly, oh, that guy shouldn't still be on the board, because they're nicely printed. Start date, end date in a very clear way. Here, I can't read what's on the counter. I'm still blowing hot and cold on this war issue, and it's preventing me from wanting to play at all. I think I have to make a decision, and I'm going to follow the rules. The deciding factor is not so much, geez, I really believe that someone has the ability to surrender under any conditions, basically, that they're losing a war, and that the gains of the victor will be proportionate to what's been gained then. In fact, I'm really kind of sold on the opposite of that. But I guess the biggest thing convincing me to go with the rules is I think it'll make the game faster. I just don't know. I'm going to put off making this decision. The problem is kind of twofold. One is what I've expressed, which is that these wars had a difficult time coming to an end at times. But the other has to do with there's nothing to really enforce and push a victor to taking a piece. Yet you get the feeling that war weariness and such things could have influenced it. But honestly, I think that's a pretty minor factor at this day and age. I mean, certainly some of these wars did end due to war weariness, but they ended to the kind of war weariness that you're going to see in any war with these things showing up. So this is the question Russia has, is how much more can they gain by dragging it out another turn? Or would they be better off taking their victory now and building on that? They'd be stripping territories away from the Poles. They'd be getting rid of the randomness. So I really do think that I was doing the right thing by saying, let's get rid of the rules as written. The person accepting the peace can demand, no, I will not. The person being surrendered to can demand, no, I will not accept a limited surrender. I want to play this out a little further. The problem that I have is that they should suffer a penalty in prestige from that. I think that would handle the whole situation. And should both people, well, that's kind of the implied design of the game. I feel like the person being surrendered to should suffer the greater penalty. So maybe we're talking a 4-2 or something. I don't know. So an interesting situation over here in the economic, the merchant side of things. The Dutch made enough money to pay their triple. And, last turn, I think I must have miscounted. Any game that has this amount of calculation in it, but doesn't provide you with sort of spreadsheets, I'm very likely to... Basically, it's a matter of... it doesn't seem that serious. So I'm just kind of counting in my head and whatever. And basically my feeling is, if it's not providing you with spreadsheets and stuff like that to aid you in the calculations, it doesn't really matter. And, in this case, probably doesn't matter that much. To make a mistake. But I probably missed some of my production last turn for the Dutch, because they just didn't have a lot of money. Anyway, the fact of the matter is they had enough to go the 3 times this time, and there's 2 responses to that. So far in this game, I've been not taking the response of, I can pay triple to avoid being penalized if I have that cash. England did it this time, and it actually worked out kind of nicely for them because Spain did not. And it's going to probably force everyone to always pay triple now, when it looks like the Dutch can do that. Other people who pay triple dividends don't get any benefit out of it. They don't get to do high competition or whatever. But they're protected from the high competition, which is the big effect there. The other use of the money that you could be using for this is you could pump it into building new ships, which is what the Spanish tried to do. And it looks like they succeeded. The odds of a new ship are actually better than the chance of losing a ship. So if you spend the money on a new ship, you have a slightly better chance than if you spend the money to try to protect your investment. But the reason the English choice isn't bad is because the English have a smaller commercial structure than the Spanish do after building that ship. So now the Spaniards paid less than the English did, although they have a larger structure. Therefore, the English got prestige off of it, and the Spanish lost prestige. Now, the net, because the Spanish paid double, is they stay even. But we have major gains by both the Dutch and English. And we can see, the Dutch are not getting that hurt by these regular wars. That's frustrating. It feels like you should be able to get a grip on people. Maybe if they couldn't surrender, right? Nah, it wouldn't make that big a difference. It would just give a chance of freezing them in place. All right, well, I decided the Poles are going to surrender and Russia's going to accept it. With that 4-2 in place penalty, with the majority of the penalty going to the Russians if they don't accept the peace, just a simple surrender, that's a significant, perhaps about as significant as any imposition as you can make on them to accept a peace. Now, what they're offering, though, it starts to get things tricky. So, for one thing, there's a lot of territory under Russian control. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 provinces. This has already been conquered, so it's gone. That means I get 5 big demands, which is what you get in a enforced, constrained peace. You might get more on a country like Poland if you take more of their territory, or whatever. It also means that 4 provinces change hands. Well, what provinces can I take? All right, I got problems. First of all, Pripyat, Minsk, something Orly, and some other place is what constitutes Lithuania. If I can find it. Oh, jeez. I had it somewhere. God, this shit is so... here. Here's their claim. Lithuania, Orly, Minsk, and Pripyat. But then down here, Minsk and Berenzia are considered Lithuania East. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. And I think this is Berenzia because this is something else. Bryansk or something. I've got no claims that I can tell to the Ukraine, but I don't know, because I did hold it, but I don't think I have one to Bryansk, because I never had that. Trying to figure out if I've got any right to take something is just such a bitch in this game. And, there's just, the game is made up of all kinds of stupid little lists, here, there, and everywhere, and there's no single one that's useful in any single condition. It's like when I'm looking up the economics, I'm on 4 different pages trying to find out what I have to fucking do. Here, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to probably have to read significant portions of the rules again to try to find, or at least skim through, to try to find the goddamn sections that might pertain to this, and then try to figure out what the hell the designer actually meant out of it all. And, it ain't worth it. Too much of a damn headache to figure out, because I realized one thing. I'm playing something that's not the Grand Campaign. Now, the game suggests that you can do this, but the rules obviously aren't designed for it. This particular province is the one I have the least understanding of what to do with. I gave Russia the right to claim that, as though they had once owned it. They once owned the Ukraine and have claim to it. They have claim to Smolensk. This particular province, I think they're supposed to have claim to, but it just never shows up. Maybe it was somewhere, I don't know. Maybe in the scenario. But the restriction that they can't take a principality, such as the Baltic, without taking the whole thing, or Lithuania. Now, of course, some of that, the whole thing, they already own, so presumably they could never take it because it's split between the two countries as the rules are written. But assuming that you say, well, they can take, if they can take everything of the principality from the country in question, fine. And they could take the Baltic because it's disputed one by one and some of the Lithuanian territories. But the fact that they do not have whatever Orly here is means they can't take any of the territory in Lithuania. They don't have claim to this. Yeah, this is B something or another. That's how I started to write it down because I was trying to make a peace treaty. And they don't have K something, I think. I don't know what that is. Anyway, it's not Latvia, it's K something. The map is unreadable. Okay, and therefore translating things over to the text is difficult. So anyway, all they could take in a demand would be Ukrainia, B something, and Podolia. All right, well, that adds up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 prestige. Russia realizes I can force the Poles to refuse the peace by taking, as my next demand say, a major prestige demand, which would be 5 more prestige. The Poles can't accept that. They're not allowed to. Given that they have a way to not drop below 5, and in this case they refused it, I only made 2 demands, which is far less than I needed to, so the refusal reverses or inverts who gets the bigger penalty. So now the Poles get the 4-point penalty, the Russians get the 2-point penalty. That's reflected here in the temporary penalties, but it's also reflected over here, and we get to continue the war. Whee! Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Who the fuck knows? I don't even know if I'm through the diplomacy phase, but, you know, this is how much fun I'm having at this point. And I don't know if... I think the only thing that I'd have fun with now are the kind of simple things that I was kind of hoping to avoid while I'm out of work. But I'm just becoming so disassociated and so disgusted with my life that I'm unable to really concentrate on games. It suffers from a factor that's psychological for me that happens in a lot of games. As I'm doing my economic phase, I realize, you know, I'm essentially selecting my regiments at random and where they set up. I just can't be bothered to read every unit, and especially to try to figure out where they all are. When I have piles and piles of units and where they all set up, I have to make too big a decision for the kind I like. And so much of this game is that kind of stuff. Just these piddly little things that maybe actually, you know, improve some realism design or something, but in actual play, when I face it at least, it means, well, fuck realism. We're getting random setup which province I build a unit in, you know. However you want to look at that, that bothers me. When a game gets too mechanically, or in this case mentally mechanically, because I'm at the same time trying to juggle 3 numbers in my head to figure out how much money I have. You know, I have to look at my tax number, start subtracting off that, then count the number of units that I have on the board. All of this could be done on a spreadsheet in a much, much better fashion. The problem, of course, well, it's done by the regiment, so each regiment on the board would have to be individually tracked, and that's going to be a pain in the ass too. There's no easy way of keeping track of an actual count of a lot of different pieces. It's going to be an annoyance in play no matter what. And the fact that this game, unlike, say, EU, which has lots and lots of overhead, but all that overhead's kind of easy to assume, and you know, in terms of it's all on paperwork and stuff. This one, there's just no way around it. The obnoxious thing in EU is maybe keeping track of, you know, each country has a couple of leaders, which ones might be dying at any particular time, but they're easy to find. Here, It's hard to find the dates. You have to look in the rules or in here because the counters are useless. All right, at the end of spring, and again, I can't keep track of, when things fell and when they didn't. I'm trying to do my best to guess, but that's the best I can do without some sort of device. The Poles pushed forward against Peter. Took some heavy losses through attrition and said, I'm not as big as he is, I'm not going to attack. But size of his stack is really deceptive in this game. Peter's stack actually has 3 leaders and 3 artillery in it. So it was a smaller force. Peter ends up attacking anyway, and he wins the battle because of quality of units. 2 rounds of battle, as I'm trying to remember to do now. Meanwhile, the Russians have advanced and taken enough that they're happy at this point with the peace they would get, I think. They're at 1, 2. I swear I took Podolia. I was considering it in the peace. Now, I may have moved this. I don't know. Well, I guess I lost it. I'm not sure if that fortress was paid for or not anyway. So I think it wasn't, but damned if I know for sure. Because if Poland had money, they would have paid for it. No, because they would have built armies. Okay, so they didn't pay for it. Trying to guess. Anyway, Podolia was one of the things I thought I could get, but apparently not unless I bumped or moved this. Which may well have happened. There's enough provinces, though, I think. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not this, 7, 8 provinces at this point. That's going to give, I think, 5 peace choices. Shit, I don't remember. I don't know if that gives 5 peace choices or 5 territories. I think it only gives 4 territories. And hell, I may have wanted to claim something. I'm not sure what I can take. But one of the biggies is, one of those territories is Lithuania, which is, actually, that doesn't count. So I can't count these as 4 territories. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I've got 5 territories because the Baltics also only counts as 1, I guess. So I can only take 4 demands and 3 territories or something like that. And maybe I'll remember that, or maybe I'm wrong, and I'll find out differently by the time the peace actually rolls around or whatever. But it looks pretty damn bad for Poland. It was fairly evenly matched until things kind of broke, and at that point Austria had already made their decision to get out of the game. Right, well, here we are in 1707, and at this point the Poles will not be able to avoid a peace. Not that they wanted to. They wanted the peace, but the Russians were able to engineer such a peace that they could not sign it. As the turn winds down, we have one thing. The Turks have a new ruler, Mohammed I. Now, he's a minor until 1711, assuming that 15 years is correct. I just don't want to bother looking things up anymore. It's just too much damn work. And it's not like I'm remembering. When a rule book's poorly organized, when it doesn't sink into me. And I think anything that comes in loose leaf, unbound, I don't care if you put any report covers or anything on it, it's not going to do it for me, I don't think. It's just not as sufficient. It just degrades my experience of the game tremendously. To have a pile of loose leaf paper I got to deal with. And whether I bind it or not, whatever, the AWE stuff is crappy enough to begin with, but I take a certain pleasure in flipping through the pages, etc. This, it just gives me a fucking headache, and that's what the whole game's been doing. It's why I don't print out rules ever, why I can't stand living rules. And it's a pity, but I think this game has a lot of problems even without that aspect. The 07 event phase, we had inflation in Poland and famine in Austria. Inflation's not that big a deal, except that Poland's even more, in trouble in terms of the current war, but they're going to not be able to spend money. Inflation just adds to the cost of building units. And Poland's going to be in a lot of trouble after this. The commercial side of things, the Dutch didn't do so well this time. They ended up only being able to pay 2, but they did have the extra cash, therefore, to build their final merchant fleet. They're up to, I think, a 15 structure. They can't get any bigger. This is the share of, the economy that they're going to get. And online next turn, we'll have the Spanish ship that was built last turn. Everybody went forward 1 space except the Dutch, who went 2. So we've got kind of, that usual point spread. Taxes going into Russia and Sweden. The feeling there being the only way to get ahead in this game seems to be to have a merchant fleet, or at least the best way to get ahead. Well, that's not really fair, but it is a way to pad your prestige points. Russia can afford it. I'm not so sure Sweden can. They're unable to build an army because of that extra buck that they're diverting each turn into their treasury. Basically, right now, they could build 1 more unit. And they have a few more units left, I think. I'll have to check all the armies. I'll do it after the peace because Poland's going to lose a big chunk of territory. Certainly all of Lithuania, all 4 spaces of that. Poland's just going to be wiped down to almost nothing. They're going to lose the Baltic. That's 2 provinces, right? They're going to lose about 2 more. Podolia has fallen. What else is available to take? Probably nothing. I think that's so they're going to lose 3 provinces, but 2 of those provinces are actually full principalities, as it were. And Russia's just going to be huge. Now that's going to be kind of scary. The rest of the world is going to feel kind of pressured by Russia at that point. Historically, Russia didn't expand this deep into Poland as they're going to until the division of Poland, the partition, which really, everybody kind of agreed to who was over there. Everybody's not too happy about this situation, so you might actually see a resurgence of Poland with an alliance there. We want to see how the points fall out. Prussia certainly isn't going to declare war on Poland right away. And the question is what to do about Holland, of course, because they're sitting here still way ahead in points. 530. Next competitor, I think, is around 470. That's England, 474. Why should Prussia really help England necessarily? Maybe playing for second at this point is the best move, or trying to form a continental alliance against both the seafaring powers, or whatever. It's hard to tell, but it feels like whatever we're doing here against Holland isn't really furthering Prussia's goals. It definitely is helping England catch up a little bit. This piece is essentially enforced. Now, looking at the optional rules again or the suggested errata, to take a look if they would have helped. Is there any reason Poland wanted to keep fighting this war? No, they wanted out of it last turn, right? They have no army and basically would have been overrun completely. Could the conditions have been less? Conceivably. At this point, we were at 5 picks, which is what an unconditional surrender gives, the enforced peace. And we were at 4 territories granted. It would have gone to 5 territories granted otherwise, which would have meant Podolia as well. That didn't get captured. What we had was the Ukraine and Bryansk or whatever, all of Lithuania, and then all of the Baltic states were converted. Now, if those were not counted as principalities, we would have had more picks. So it would have worked out so that we could take the provinces anyway, probably, or at least most of them. This creates a humongous Russia. Production-wise, Russia's at 20 plus 2, which makes them bigger than anyone on the board except France in terms of income, but they don't have the huge public debt that France has, which is keeping France out of the game. So the only other country with an income that's comparable right now is, well, actually both Spain and England have comparable incomes. And you could say Holland almost does, but they don't have an army or a navy that they can really build up. Unlike Spain and England, though, Russia can build 5 units per turn. They have this humongous manpower. So they are truly the giant in the game at this point. They also have a bigger army now. It's not that much bigger. They had most of the units. They gained a couple of units. The biggie probably is the Baltic state units that they gained. Their borders are all held by very weak powers now. Turkey is probably the strongest of the pile, but tottering, unable to really grow its forces with what it looks like a $30 public debt there. I erased the zero somehow a little bit, which is a really, taxing event on their economy. Poland is absolutely wrecked. What did they take other than the provinces? They took a major financial claim, which means Poland's going to owe $12 over the next 3 years. They only have a $6 income now. Poland is just wrecked. They also don't have much in the way of an army. This is all they've got, and their feudal, once mighty feudal forces have been diminished as well. And then finally Sweden, who's been completely handcuffed. And by pursuing the attempt to get a trading company up, I think have made themselves completely unimportant as a military power, which means Russia can grab Finland if they so desire. They've also changed the commercial strategies. Commerce. This has already gone into the Russian taxation, but we've got this wood also going there. So, all right, it wasn't as big as I thought it would be because the cereal here is over in Pomerania, or Posen, or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, it is going to shift some of the finances a little bit, perhaps. I really doubt that this is going to be contested. Somebody else probably willing to go in there for 3, but contested at 1.5, there are better places to go. There are 2-point places still left. So somebody's going to pull out of there. That's going to up their taxation. Instead of getting $1 a turn, they'll get $2 a turn. Someday soon, they'll have their own commerce fleet, maybe. They'll also probably start building their own navy if they can, because that's kind of a weak spot that they have. The problem with that is, of course, until it gets big, and it takes a long time to build up a big navy. I don't know how big it can get. It can get pretty big, I assume. Until it gets reasonably large, they can't really play on the world stage as a naval power. Anyway, this phase has been kind of exciting. I don't think I'm doing anything else. Oh, yeah, one more thing. They took a political demand. They took Saxony away from the Poles. So now they have an interest over in Germany, which, with the ability to cross Poland, etc., they can become a real player in the continent finally. This is something that did not happen in Peter the Great's time. So Russia's well ahead. What is this, damn garbage trucks? Well ahead of their historical pace. In fact, they're so far ahead that the game doesn't really give them much more to do. Other than Podelsia and Finland, anything else that they're going to add is going to be largely them buying a claim and working their way into something. My guess is that, well, see, here's the thing. The way the game is structured, the way the victory points occur, unless you go commercial, the only way to keep your prestige up is to keep winning wars, to go Napoleon all over the place. Whether or not they want to buy more territory is a questionable thing. They can strip things away from their neighbors and take away their neighbors' ability to fight by doing so. And finally, the prestige. Well, course, Poland drops all the way down, but they're able to save themselves. In fact, they dropped way below this. I don't know what to do here. Do they stop at 0, or does the negative get performed and then what gets bumped? I'm going to stop them at 0, not give them an additional penalty, bump them up to 7. Russia can't gain anymore. Not only are they at the top of the chart, but anything over 15 would be disallowed. And they kind of knew they weren't going to get back the points they were spending. They were going to be at the top of the chart for a while. And, well, it's going to be kind of a quick turn after this, other than the economic side of things. Everything else is, just going to be moving units back. Not that the military phase is ever very difficult to play out. All right, so we finished up 1707. Not a lot happened. One thing I wanted to do that I forgot to was kind of trace the Russian border. In fact, I'll trace all the national borders at this point, just at least where there's some interest going on. So the Russians through here, down through the Baltics, over here through Lithuania, and then down here. Very much close to what Russia achieves at its height. Not much more left to get. Podolzia, which I think they had that by the end. Yeah, they had that by the end of the century. Okay, let's look at the Turkish border, cutting across here. I like to. When I used to do EU, I used to make little colored maps of the game as it went at the end of each period. That was really an exciting and happy thing for me. I no longer do anything like that. I'm just not that cool anymore, I guess. Poland really diminished, obviously. We've seen the Russian border of Poland cutting through here. And then the rest is really just the colored border with East Prussia over here. Prussia. It looks like there's Prussian troops in Hanover. Let me get those out of there. They're just artillery, and I meant to move them. The Prussian line on the Polish side, then here along Saxony, up, of course, and across to get Schleswig. And then over here on the other side of Hanover, they have Cleves and Oldenburg. Spain still holds all of Flanders and Franche-Comté, most of their Burgundian inheritance. And then elsewhere, they hold everything that they had. They hold the Italian states here, they hold Naples, and they hold, of course, all of Spain. I guess that's really about it. The fact that France hasn't been able to grow, that they were stymied early, the fact that Russia looks like an unbound creature, but in some sense, it's hard to tell, how big a threat is Russia, because you also have to worry about the victory point situation. So Russia's only at 405, without a trading company and without much opportunity to expand, except by beating up on their neighbors continuously. Of course, beating up on your neighbors may cost you something because you have to pay to grab a claim to something, then you have to pay to declare war unless you get an event, and then you have to beat them up, which they should be capable of doing with their size of an army. There's not a lot in the game to really oppose that, Russia's going to gobble up their neighbors. They're not going to get any stronger by doing so. The only thing that, except economically, which doesn't matter too much. I actually like that factor in the game. So, I've alluded to this before. Not using E there. That, not that my pronunciation can ever be really tracked very well, that the economies in a game, maybe not so much in Empires in Arms, where it is a military-based game, but in a game like EU, it feels like you have too much association between what should be private and public interests. The colonization, in some cases, was public, and this game kind of separates that. However, it doesn't handle the colonization, etc., directly. It handles the economics of the traders in a better way. The one thing that I'd say is kind of negative about it, and that maybe I appreciate more in EU, is you don't get to tax your own trading company. You only get to tax your trade by putting tariffs. On the other hand, the possibility of actually directly taxing the trading companies was something that existed, and it hindered some of the trading companies. I feel like there should be an additional layer in there. Usually you don't need additional cash, but I could see a country like Sweden or France, now they don't have trading companies anymore, wanting to eke out a little bit extra cash and putting a bit of a penalty on their trading company. That would be something that would be very hard to step back from. You'd have to pay a prestige cost or whatever to increase or decrease your taxation on your trading companies. But it might allow you just that little extra add. Because, for example, France's income is not really sufficient. Because of the pensions that they have in play, they're able to build like 1 unit a turn. Other countries are just strapped completely. And you'd imagine that the crown would make some sort of movement towards getting more money. What would that do? God knows. You know, the game is not quite the complex model to really facilitate some of the things that it seems to be reaching towards. I could see taking a game in this direction of a more realistic, yet still abstracted, but realistic in the sense that the government doesn't control everything, which is part of why it's abstracted, view of the economies of the empires. But going into, by which I mean more realistic, by allowing certain levers to be explored more carefully. For example, taxation on the companies themselves, raising taxes on the populace in non-wartime. Yet, you know, allowing that to cause real crises within the countries. It would be a complex game. This is already a fairly complicated game, although I think made far more so by the organization of the rules. But, you know, I mean, it's a, 50-page rule book plus, well, that's including most of the annexes, but plus scenarios and some special rules that aren't easily constructed there. And they didn't do a terribly good job of putting it together in a coherent manner. So, what would we be talking about? I'm not sure exactly, but I can see that this game kind of points in that direction. Anyway, I want to put a thanks out to everybody who's still watching. I kind of get the feeling that nobody would be watching for the sake of the game anymore. This is just kind of a, you know, I like hanging out with this guy. You guys are kind of like the friends that I have not met. If you can put up with me through all my cussing and complaining through the games and my coping with them, wow, you know, we should be gaming together. Anyway, up it goes.